and Dementias in Ontario. So we have an extra D, just to throw it in there. But this kind of builds on the Worldwide Fingers and the CAN Thumbs Up project that CCNA is doing, and the general metaphor of peripheral digits. But it really does sum up what we're trying to do. We want to really build a platform that serves multiple different objectives, but ultimately results in impact on health.
And I would say, Rick, that it is very practical and it's very timely for people who have these diseases right now. We actually have this wonderful opportunity to do something. So, kudos to ONDRI for doing this.
Thanks very much, Hugh. The ideas behind the HANDDS Ontario really build on everything else that you've heard about so far today, and everything that ONDRI has been and has done up until now. So we've talked about, there we go. My computer is having a mind of its own today. We've talked about the team science approach, and you've heard from many of our participants, and each of us who are speaking is representing many, many more people. And so the group expertise in ONDRI as a program, the cross-disease participants, as we've alluded to and discussed already today, looking across diseases, because the idea of a pure disease is a fallacy. Even when we're quite confident clinically that we have pure diseases, we know at autopsy we don't. So the biology is different than the phenomenology. And when it comes to impacting function, the chase for a pure disease may be more artificial than anything. The quality assurance standards, the data pipelines, the quality control methodologies, and the ability to really translate this work, as Bill was alluding to, in an automated fashion that maintains the rigor that we've already invested and developed in ONDRI 1, but that can be applied to more real-time data collection, real-time data processing, real-time feedback, or at the very least, and in the earlier phases, at least near real-time. So getting people reports, within a few weeks of their wear, rather than within a few months or a few years of their wear. As Hugh has said, research is slow, and we want to be bridging that gap. This is really, we've talked before at ONDRI about the philosophy of embedding research in care. In HANDDS Ontario, we're also talking about embedding care in research, which is something that, the catchphrase research embedded in care has really become more well recognized, but I think people sometimes forget about the flip side, and that's embedding the care into research. And we want the research to really be helping to drive self-care and clinical care, as we've talked about. We in ONDRI have the unique opportunity to have the collaborations and the voice that you've just heard of people with lived experience, of advocates and professionals within organizations like Heart and Stroke, like Alzheimer's Association, who are advocates for and serve the needs of persons living with these diseases. And then we have the foundational elements for this huge amounts of data management, statistical manipulation, helping us to look for outliers, look for abnormal data, catch problems before we've done all of our analyses, and share that data. Because again, this is, there's an obligation, this is publicly funded data in a publicly funded healthcare system. And so ultimately this data has to contribute to the global efforts to combat neurodegenerative disease and dementia. What we're really proposing in HANDDS Ontario is an adaptive platform study. And, in an intervention study, in clinical trials, we talk about adaptive clinical trials platforms, or an adaptive platform trial. And the idea here is and there's actually a very nice review in Nature Reviews Drug Discovery from last year, but the idea is you have ongoing recruitment into a given cohort or a given disease, where you're just rolling them from study to study, where you're having an adaptive clinical trial platform where you might shut down one arm and increase another arm. There's all sorts of innovative clinical trial designs that can utilize a platform method to really study multiple interventions of a disease or condition in an ongoing manner. And the interventions can kind of come and go based on decision algorithms, based on hypotheses, based on new technology. This is really in the clinical trials platform. What we're really talking about is especially in aging neurodegenerative disease and dementia, we need an adaptive platform that supports both ends. So we need to support intervention, but we also need discovery. And I think Mario's made this point that on a foundational level, we just don't know enough. It's been a long time, and 100 years since Alzheimer's, initial publications, and we still really don't know enough. We certainly don't know enough about, all the interactions and overlaps. Again, Sudha spoke to this earlier, but the ALS Parkinson spectrum and the FTD Alzheimer's spectrums, and exactly how vascular disease contributes to all of this. We need to learn more. And so what we're looking at is setting up an adaptive platform that will be a study in and of itself, that can facilitate clinical trials and intervention studies and or other discovery studies on the basis of that foundational cross-disease discovery cohort. The concept here is kind of modular design. So people who are programmers will appreciate the almost C++ roots of all this, but you have the basic package that everybody gets, and then you might have packages that are specific to individual conditions. So if we want to look at skin biopsy in Parkinson's disease, as we've talked about before, that can be layered onto this as a specific disease-specific, diagnostic-specific validation question that can be layered on for just that cohort. But those participants can still do the core data, the core elements of the HANDS Ontario study, so they can contribute to cross-disease analyses as well. And so it may even be possible, right now we're describing this foundational study, people could enroll as a standalone, and this is one of the things we're going to be opening up for discussion later, is direct to participant enrollment outside of a clinic, outside of a site-specific or physician-specific enrollment. Could participants, and how do we do this? How do we validate the diagnosis? How do we ensure we have their clinicians involved such that we can feedback incidental findings or important results while we're also giving results to participants? Those who do enroll in the core, especially if you do more broad enrollment, could be recruited then to individual sub-studies. So we're going to build those sub-studies in phases with an eye hopefully towards long-term and even renewal. This could be foundational to where ONDRI grows in the future. So on the bedrock of the ONDRI and I guess IDP more broadly, the OBI secret sauce with data standardization, rigorous quality control, pipelines for automated processing, integrating research into care and care into research, going cross-disease with a team science approach. That foundation, we layer on the learnings from AIM-1 and the team building that we've done in AIM-1, bringing all of the passionate people here that you see together, clinicians, patients, organizations, and the PCAC, building on the strengths of OBI more generally and brain code, and our NIBS platform, we call it neuroinformatics and biostatistics, to facilitate data flow, data quality, data analysis, to manage the terabytes of data that we're going to be getting, build on the AIM-2 developmental discovery work that has been and is still being done within the AIM, and build on that linkage through to AIM-4. On that bedrock, we can build a cross-disease cohort asking specific questions, and then individual disease-specific studies looking at dementia in nursing homes community, looking at Parkinson's, looking at ALS, and potentially supplementing existing trials. So what we're talking about is defining a core minimum that could be applied in multiple different disease cohorts, in multiple different types of studies, be they observational or interventional, and in multiple different settings. So this has to be quite robust. So we're talking about at least a minimum remote monitoring toolkit. With the ANI sensor, this would probably be a chest sensor and at least a single limb sensor. Again, some studies, like a Parkinson-specific study where you have asymmetries, and we want to do both gait and tremor, we may want to be doing all 4 limbs. We want a minimum clinical data set. We want encrypted health card numbers, building on the process that we've already done in ONDRI and OBI more broadly. We have validated in a cohort of vascular stroke populations in TIA. We validated where we screened over 10,000 people for cognitive impairment. We linked 8,000 eligible, so with TIA or stroke participants, and we showed we had 99.9% success in matching encrypted health card numbers. So we never actually had the raw health card data. It was encrypted at source to allow privacy protected linkage. We want to continue to develop discovery data, which means getting fluid biomarkers, genetic biomarkers in an easily accessible way. So CSF and PET in Ontario are prohibitive, and patients, there are a huge ask for patients, they're not funded well. It's really not feasible to collect at a large scale across cohorts, but serum samples and DNA samples are. The concept of anonymized removal of direct identifiers for widespread data release, and consent to be recontacted so that we could do autopsy studies, we could do new genetic markers if they come up in the future, or we could add them to future trials. Baked right into this is the concept of meaningful feedback. This is what I was alluding to that we're coming to now, where participants get something out of participating. It's not just a, give us your data, thank you very much, we do appreciate your contributing to the big picture. And there's a satisfaction inherent in that many of our ONDRI 1 participants really spoke to, but that really gets you a subset of very motivated participants who understand how they may be contributing to other people's disease in the future. But as Hugh said, there's a huge need for helping people now. We want to give them something out of their participation that they can't get if they're not participating, but that makes it more than just a thank you and a big picture pat on the back, but something that can be helpful to them now. The idea of the multidimensional wearable biosensors is that it can collect a lot of very meaningful, very useful data right now that is well validated, that we know what's important and what needs to be reported. So for example, a 7-day wear is essentially a 7-day Holter monitor. We can detect atrial fibrillation or other cardiac arrhythmias that are increasingly prevalent in our demographic. They are a very large risk factor for overt strokes and covert strokes in our population, both of which, and microinfarcts as well, all of which contribute to cognitive and functional decline across our populations. So it's a meaningful, useful activity to do, and arguably should be done more routinely. This is my perspective as a stroke neurologist, admittedly, but it's the most easily preventable and most, the intervention with the most evidence of benefit. If we prevent strokes, we prevent decline in people who are vulnerable for other neurodegenerative diseases. So the ambulatory monitors can also detect indirect estimates using pulse wave velocity of blood pressure. We can be detecting blood pressure variability. We can be detecting dysautonomia, so we can, huge fluctuations in blood pressure. Certainly in stroke, we need to optimize blood pressure. There's, early data that suggests that we may reduce conversion, to MCI, but maybe not to dementia, although there's trends in that direction. By treating blood pressure, we can quite possibly reduce the burden of neurodegenerative disease and dementia, or at least delay symptoms. But we also hear a lot from our primary care partners, geriatricians, family doctors, and patients that aggressive blood pressure lowering is sometimes a concern because we make people fatigued, we may throw their balance off, we may give them orthostatic challenges so they can get syncope or falls or side effects. Often people in primary care are very hesitant to be super aggressive about blood pressure management. And so getting a much more reliable estimate of home, real-world, naturalistic blood pressure has a lot of potential. This is essentially a 7-day sleep study. Overnight polysomnograms are extremely challenging in people with neurodegenerative diseases, especially those with dementia and severe cognitive impairments. It's just very difficult to wire somebody up. But if you have a sensor that they can wear and tolerate, you're going to be getting indirect measures, and Andrew Lim can speak to this in much more detail, as Bill alluded to in the AIM2 talk. But we can get measures of sleep quality and sleep fragmentation through these measurements. And certainly activity, exercise, not just step counts, but pairing pairing that with cardiac information, with blood pressure information, we can actually get a lot of feedback to say, not only are you active, but you're actually being active in a way that's good for your cardiovascular system, or hold on a second, as you're pushing yourself, we're starting to see your heart rate go super fast, and maybe you're in a red zone and you might want to back off a little bit. There's all sorts of useful information we can be giving out of a 7-day wear. So in order to make this implementable, we need to have the platform for discovery, for facilitating these add-on studies, but it also has to be a platform that, you know, for an REB to approve, for a patient to consent to, there has to be a question. There has to be a purpose for the study itself, in addition to being a platform. And so the core study, we're really going to be asking 4 questions. Can clinical data, fluid biomarkers, and wearable monitors be usable across diverse cohorts in diverse settings to provide valuable diagnostic data and predictive utility for important clinical outcomes, and provide data that's helpful to the individuals, their caregivers, or their physicians? So Hugh, you can see your questions are baked right in here. This is very much the purpose of the study. And I hope people can also see how this is really building. When we talk about predictive utility for important clinical outcomes, this can include outcomes measured as part of the study, but more importantly, with that permission to link to the health services data, we can be looking at admissions to or visits to emergency departments, admissions to care facilities, either acute or rehab or long-term care. We can be looking at mortality. We can be looking at doctor's visits. There's a lot of outcomes, both as far as health expenditures, but also important functional clinical outcomes that are important to participants. We can also potentially be detecting things like emerge visits for falls or so on. So this core study is going to ask and answer those questions over time. This core study is not designed, I should emphasize, to be finished at the end of 2022, when we're going to be having to give the report, as Kirk emphasized at the beginning today. This core study we will want to be going on. So I'm getting some notes from Kirk that I'm running a little bit on the long side. So I'm just going to highlight that we have some 3 early phase studies that we're exploring, layering onto the protocol, looking at whether we can detect health status changes and refine reporting for patients and physicians with dementia, looking at behavioral challenges in people living in nursing homes or being served by geriatric outreach in the community. And I believe Kelly from the PGLO is here. We are looking at working with the group at Toronto Western, as well as the group in Ottawa, to explore opportunities to use the biosensors to improve self-care and function, and explore the opportunity to be detecting falls, microaspirations, dysautonomia. Dr. Lang can speak to questions if there are, but we're also, potentially saying, can we use this even in place of a dopamine challenge? So ease the burden in some cases. If we can get similar data or even better data, we might ease the burden on the healthcare system, in addition to expanding access to participants, because this is all stuff that can be done in the home, in the community. And certainly in the ALS population, the ability to explore aspirations, respiratory changes, which trigger clear interventions. So when people are starting to aspirate a lot, the feeding tube placement or BiPAP use in people with nocturnal breathing changes really do change quality of life and even length of survival for some patients with ALS. So can we detect this in a much more sensitive, early way, and that is done in the patient's home, potentially, long before they might flag to a physician, I'm choking every other day. So we're trying to design those studies. We have had people express some interest in layering HANDS Ontario onto existing or otherwise funded studies. So Krista Langto and Sandra Black are co-PIs of a CIHR funded study, clinical trial of using nabilone for behavioral control, or behavioral management, I guess, in participants with severe dementia. And these tools and devices might be very useful add-ons, and the pipeline into health services research for longer term outcomes may be very attractive to layer on. And Dr. Langto has also expressed interest in applying these into 2 of her studies of participants with vascular cognitive impairment. So the idea here, as you've heard, we are leveraging ONDRI to go get grants in multiple different ways in multiple different areas. And we can run that leveraging both ways. We can leverage existing grants to accelerate recruitment into the core studies and some of these add-on studies. And we can build on this to go get additional grants to grow the cohorts. So the recruitment retention infrastructure of the individual sub-studies can help HANDS Ontario extend its reach. And we can support common data element collections, both clinical data, biosamples, and wearable data, and the linkage to administrative data sets. So the idea here is multiple wins, and of course, patients and caregivers get the wins. So this is that concept that HANDS Ontario can become, build on the pillars and the foundations of AIM-1, AIM-2, AIM-3, and AIM-4, built on everything that's been accomplished so far and the people that we have at the table to really build this adaptive study platform on which sub-studies can get leveraged, but cross-disease work can still happen. And so this is sort of the ultimate ONDRI synthesis plan. Our hope is that several of these sub-studies can provide meaningful, impactful outcomes within the next 1 to 2 years that can be useful for OBI and for patients, more importantly. So to address, some of Hugh's advocacy that we want to get patients' impact sooner than later, this has the potential for quick wins. Obviously, research is still way slower than we want. Contracts and REB and ethics and implementation is far slower than we'd like. But we're really developing this protocol now, and today is really a great opportunity for us to show it to this, the group at large, and get some feedback. So Kirk, my apologies for going over, but I think it's, I hope it was an important and useful overview of, when we talk about where we've been, what each AIM is doing. I hope this also gives some context as to why each AIM is doing. And how we're starting to bring those together into a bigger picture that can have both immediate and long-term impacts as the AIMs continue to generate impactful results in and of themselves, that you can see how they can be aggregated to something bigger.
All right, thanks, Rick. We are cutting into our next sort of in-camera session, so we do need to keep the questions short. So for those of you that are going into the next session with us, so the ONDRI exec and the external advisors, maybe we can continue the conversation there. But if there's any burning questions, then let's just carve out 3 to 5 minutes to do that now.
Can I just jump in quickly? First of all, I think we have to be very careful about protein biomarkers that might tell you you have a disease pathology before there's anything we know to do exactly other than lifestyle adjustments, which we're already advising. It's quite different than finding orthostatic hypertension or people have arrhythmias. So we have to be very, very careful. And the pre-symptomatic studies that are going on take this so seriously that I think they have to be treated differently. Okay, because that is a Pandora's box. Secondly, I think we won't have time, but if Howard Jerko is on the line, there's an adaptive design Canada thumbs up study going on through CCNA, and also wearable monitors are being used. So we need to be, collaborating closely with CCNA and make sure that we're in touch with some of those interventions that are being planned in CCNA. Just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if Howard wants to comment on that. Howard, are you on the line, on the Zoom?
It was earlier, but I don't see him.
Yeah, I don't see him anymore.
Anyway, make sure to reach out, okay? Just because it's very, very relevant.
It is ongoing.
We want to collaborate, not compete.
I think that Sandra raised some very important points about, in terms of ethics and kind of, especially regarding the proteomic biomarkers. And I mean, I think this is where we have to kind of, set up a cohort like this in the context of what other longitudinal studies of aging have done already and what they're doing. I'm pretty sure that they do collect this kind of biomarker data. And so we would probably value some input from people like Suda and Edo and our advisors. So
And this
Yeah,
is
it's called return of results, and it's a
Yeah,
very return of results is very problematic in some instances.
well, this is where the concept of multiple levels of data and feedback come in, right? There's stuff that we have to tell people about. There's stuff that they were going to want and that we should tell them about. And then there's stuff that we don't know what it means that is research grade. And, you know, I think that's really where this comes in. Sudha, I see your...
I just want to endorse what Sandra was saying and say that sometimes the things we think we have to tell people about based on the information we have at a point of time. The best example being the American College of Medical Genetics 58, returnable things. Turns out when you look at a cohort like Framingham, you have an 80-year-old with a hemochromatosis gene. So data like what you're generating is very important, and there is a risk to sharing. I completely agree. In addition to the fact, of course, that we don't yet have a treatment for any of these neurodegenerative diseases.
Thanks, Sudha. Any other quick comments before we wrap up? All right, I counted to 3 steamboats, which is my rule of thumb. So maybe Rick, I'll let you thank everyone and just and we can hopefully not indelicately invite people to get on with their day, and then the rest of us will be sticking around to discuss next year's milestones.
I just want to obviously thank all the presenters today and thank everybody who's attended for their time. We see Shelley had made a point about privacy in the chat, which will definitely, it is something that has been discussed and will continue to be discussed as far as, whether these wearables can be used for good and for ill, for things like eligibility for admission or insurance. These are issues that we are continuing to grapple with and are really important. As we've said today, all of the work we're presenting really is on behalf of a lot of people. And, you've seen, 80 odd people, probably about 90 people with those who have had to come and go, who have been involved, and our multiple stakeholders and partners that we hope this has been a really good overview for people to get a sense of the big picture, and everybody can sort of see their pieces of the puzzle here. So I wanted to thank all of the ONDRI participants again for all of your work in getting us to this stage, especially also again acknowledging the important role, and you've seen it here today, of the PCAC. And again, to our reviewers, thank you for the great comments and feedback now, and we're looking forward to the next few minutes.